Sunday Talks with the Marshmallow Man.
Hey, I'm Ossie from Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedalboard. DC audio, colors, all the good stuff. We got a sale going on, so check us out at the link down below, threemonkeyssolderless.com. All right, so it's Sunday, and we're chasing the tone, as usual. This week, I wanted to kind of continue on something that was, an interesting discovery for me in the Eruption tracks that were released, specifically the dry track. It has some clues into it as to what maybe was going on with Eddie's rig. Now, it raised some questions for me. Well, let's just first listen to what the section that I most want to talk about, which is the very end, which is, I think, is more informative or most informative as to maybe his setup. So let's just listen to this. Okay, so that is the end dive bomb that involves some of the stuff we see up here. And what the interesting part is that the, all right, here's the questions. All right. Why was in some of Eruption questions? We have questions. Why in some of Eruption, whereas phaser is on, it's subtle. So why was his phaser more subtle most of the time? So when he's playing these tracks, Jamie's Crying, playing, all different tracks through the album, his phaser is just not as obnoxious sounding as any phaser I've ever owned. Right. And I've tried, modifying phasers to get blends and getting depth switches and knobs and all sorts of stuff like that on it. And it kind of works. Maybe a solution. I don't know. Maybe his phaser was modded. Okay. But then why does it seem to at sometimes be very pronounced, right? Why did it seem to gain in strength at times, such as the end? So we hear a distinct difference between what we hear right here, which is all right, that is very pronounced phasing. Whereas if we go back a little bit further, it's not. You hear the phaser in there, but it's not as swirly or as deep sounding as it is during the dive bomb section. So that's interesting. So those are two questions that are kind of maybe the same answer. The next question is, I think, more apparent now. It's pretty obvious, but was the phaser before or after the delay unit? So you can hear clearly that the phaser at the very end is moving in a cycle and it's phasing the repeats, right? The repeats aren't being, rather the phase isn't being repeated. The repeats are being phased. So let's just, I'm sure that you guys have heard it and know what I'm referring to. Let me get over here onto, let me see if I can bring this up again. It seems to have frozen. Let's see if we can get it over here. Why is it not letting me? Okay, there we go. I couldn't grab GarageBand for a second there. So let's listen to it again of it phasing the repeats, right? Right, so that's a slow phase 90 sort of cycle. So we know that it has to be coming after the EC90 echo, or you couldn't get that effect. So that brings us to Eddie's Pedalboard. From that time, we have pictures of it. It's very confusing because it offers a lot of permutations, right? The other question that we have, which I should have gone to first, but was, all right, like let's say in the live videos around 1978, there's a few boots on YouTube that are videos of him playing Eruption. And at the end, he's messing with the EC80, speeding it up and slowing it down. Then he puts the guitar against the speaker cabinets and it's still going. They hand him another guitar and he goes right over to the pedal board, shuts off the EC80 system and goes right into You Really Got Me with a different guitar. All right, so why is it we was able to switch guitars seamlessly at the end of Eruption without any noise of amplifier plugs being plugged in and out? And why is he able to do it? Why was it he was given the guitar and then able to do it? Where was the switching done? So these are some questions. So let's look at sort of like a diagram of Eddie's pedal board around that time. Best that we can know. And we can't know what was done in the studio yet because we haven't seen any photographs. So things could have been changed. Things could have been added. Things could have been subtracted. Maybe he didn't need his backup rigs. Maybe he ran things a little bit more simply. Maybe he found some new things. Maybe he just wanted to make changes because it was an album and he was trying to really do something. And his mind was spinning and he was like, oh, what if I just change this? It needs to sound better. And we've all been there and done that. When you're under pressure, sometimes you kind of run away from, the girl you came with to and dance with someone else. May not be a good idea. So let's look at his pedal board, so to speak. So we have these two switching boxes, right? They have the 1 and 2 labeled on them. And now I'm thinking, no. Before I was thinking maybe there are boosts in there still, maybe not. I'm leaning towards there's nothing in there. They're just loop boxes. Number 2 doesn't seem to ever be connected to anything. That just seems to be a box that's sitting there most of the time. So maybe that was a box in case he broke the foot switch on number 1, and then they could just move all the cables over to number 2 and use that, and he wouldn't have to, panic and stop the show. But anyway, you have an input of some sort, a cable going into this flanger kind of hanging out, and it can go of one of two places. It could either go maybe into this phaser by bypassing this box or go into the EQ, which would then go into this box. Now, this box has 4 cables coming out of it. And the only way I can make sense of that at all is that it is exactly that, a loop box with a send and return to go out to the Univox Echo. So you would have the input to the loop box from this EQ pedal, a send out to the EC80, and then a return from the EC80 back to the box, which then could be bypassed with the foot switch. And the out would be this line down here, which would continue to the phaser, and the phaser went out to X, right? So we have X as the input question, and then Y or X, another X, 2 X's as what it was connected to on the way out. We have also these 2 little sort of circular push button switches, and I believe those are for the Echoplexes, which were off stage somewhere else. So what I'm sort of theorizing may have happened. All right, so this is something that you would see a lot in, live rigs today for big shows, right? What guitar tech's responsibilities are, how they set things up, what the artist wants to be able to do and doesn't want to bother having to do. All right, so with Greg and Brad on Aerosmith, this goes on all the time. On Green Day, when Greg was working with Jason White, I saw how everything worked. Greg was doing a lot of the switching for Jason on side of stage in Guitar World. Same thing happens out on Aerosmith. There is a pedal board out there, but a lot of the stuff that's going on happens in the pit, right? In Guitar World, behind all the amplifiers, behind the backline. So I'm going to say, what if the chain was like this? So he has the Strat and the Shark out there. Right, so the Strat on Eruption changes to the Shark for You Really Got Me. And in Guitar World, you have Rudy back there hiding away with an AB box. So both of these guitars are always sort of connected. You just hit the button and it switches out from one guitar to the other. That would explain why Eddie's not having to plug things in and out and doing weird things. It would explain why he's handed a guitar and he just has to turn off the echoes, and that guitar is now live, right? Because it's already been switched by Rudy or somebody else back behind there. He doesn't have to worry about running to his pedal board to turn things, to switch guitars, and it just wouldn't make any sense. So I think a lot's going on back behind the back line. So you have the AB box back there, right? Switching back and forth. And this is where I sort of get into, and this is all what if, right? I'm always like, what if? What if this was the case that Eddie was using a very primitive version, not even primitive, but a early version of what he would go on to use for the rest of his life, which was a wet dry rig, where there was a master head and then there was a dead down the middle center sound that was unmolested, so to speak. So you had your core meaty sound that was solid. It didn't have all the problems you have when you start connecting lots of effects in front of a signal or around a signal. Sort of changing the dynamics of it, changing the, frequency response. Often it sounds noisier or duller, or it just doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound as good as that dry, unaffected, just like straight tone. I mean, Luke talked about all that, like how it was really important to have that center sort of, in a wet, dry, or wet, dry. Your dry cab should be really simple and just the meat of the guitar sound that is as simple and as straightforward and as pure sounding as possible. And that will be retained. And then all the other effects, if they sound a little bit less than perfect, that's fine, because the center sound is what's carrying the day. So we're going to have from the AB box that is backstage that Rudy's messing around with, it goes into a main Marshall head. All right. And this is the thing that's going to create the distortion, the sound that he's looking for. And it's loaded, has a load box on it with 2 line outs on it. Now, I believe that the amplifier load box was either broken, improperly designed, a combination of both, improperly used, not quite, understood yet. But I think that the load box was causing problems with the amplifier. And I think the way that Eddie liked to run things, it was definitely causing problems with the amplifier. So I think the Variac became a necessity for how the amplifier was loaded, which created this really kind of unique distortion tone. The Variac was necessary to keep the amp from exploding. And it had the benefit of actually making it sound even a little bit more unique. So I think there was some serendipity of leapfrogging. Well, we need to do this for necessity, but serendipitously, it creates something that I like, and it leads us in directions, right? So necessity is always the mother of invention. So the invented guitar's tone, I always believe is a requirement of necessity. And then it blooms into something. All right, so we have the load. We have the 2 guitars to the AB box to the main Marshall, which goes into the load box with 2 variable line outs. One of these line outs is going to another Marshall head. All right, that's up on the back line. And it's going into the power section, I believe, maybe, the power section of the amplifier. It's bypassing the front panel. It's just going into the power amp, and you can control how loud it is via the load box. So that solves the problem of the necessity of having a variable stage volume that you can use on different size venues, where you're going to be dealing with front of house, you're going to be dealing with vocal mics, drums, bass. Stage volume needs to be controlled. If you're going to get a proper mix, you cannot have everybody banging into each other. It just doesn't work. If Eddie's running 110 decibels on a small stage, David Lee Roth is going to have to sing like this, trying to get away from Eddie's sound, trying to create, a baffle from the mic from Eddie's blaring guitar sound. I mean, I've seen it enough. You cannot do that. It doesn't work. So you have to manage your stage volume. So this was the mother of invention. All right. So the load box, you had to dry down the middle core tone. And then I think the second line out went out to the pedal board. What if it did? What if it came out from Rudy's world, from that load box, and went out to this pedal board? Where's the pedal board again? Goes into this flanger. and then the flanger can be switched around. Still got to work out why you would do that manually versus non-manually. I think it has something to do with the 6-band EQ not having a bypass on it, that it's always on. So it may have been, I'm not going to build another loop box. I don't know why, but for some reason there was still an option to do switching. We'll have to look into that more, but I think as time goes on, maybe it'll become apparent. So I think in any case, this flanger or this system here, this pedal board, was fed by the load box that was backstage. So we had the load box feeding the pedal board, which then left the pedal board, and there's still the echoplexes, right? So we see the two circular guys, two circular little foot switches to control the echoplexes. So the echoplexes are out there on the stage. Now, I think that they are in series. What if they are in series? In series, you would get the ability to have a short slap and then a long slap. So you could have like this more interesting sort of delay signal. And that's something that is, went on in time and went to different guys used to use it all the time, right? Like Lukather talks about using like a 200 and then like a 400, somewhere around there slap at the same time. And it creates, he thinks it sounds better to his ears than like reverb does. It sounds more interesting to his ears. So I'm going to say that for my purposes, the echoplexes are in series. Now they could be, what if they're in, parallel? Then that will require 3 heads. But we could explore that possibility too. But for now, we're going to do the pedal board is running into an echoplex, into another echoplex, and then those output of the echoplexes goes into another Marshall power amp, right? So another Marshall head that's being used as a power amp, and then into the speaker cabinets. So what we have here is a split after the line box into a wet dry situation, which is something that carried on in his career till the very end, right? This is what he was always sort of doing. So I think he was doing it early on as well. So it has some advantages, right? And it answers some of these questions. So why was the phaser more subtle most of the time? Well, if you look at this sort of arrangement, the phaser is not on the dry signal. It's not on the dry. It's only on the wet. So it would reduce the effect of the phaser, and it could also create more interesting dynamics between the phaser and the other amplifier because they're on separate lines. It takes care of the problem of, all those things that we talked about degrading your signal. If your phaser is in line with your primary tone, you get a degraded signal. The phaser's out of control in terms of its strength. It's too strong. It also answers the question of why did it get loud? Well, why does the phaser become more prominent at the end of eruption? That's because the dry signal has been removed from the equation, and now you just have the phaser, the wet rig running, and the phaser now, relatively speaking, is not at 50% or whatever the mix is between wet and dry, 50-50, 60-40. It's now 100% of what you're hearing. So it's going to hear more, it's going to sound more intense. You're going to hear it more. Whereas when he's doing the hammer-ons and the picking, it's somewhere a ratio, 60-40, 50-50, 70-30, whatever it happens to be, we can play around with that. So that's sort of my theory of what if and how do we answer these questions that are obviously apparent. What explains all of that? So that's like the first sort of idea, the first stage to begin. So then comes the experimenting. So now it's time to try it out. So I'm really happy with the way the Marshmallow sounds. So we're going to first demonstrate the dry, unaffected sound. And this will be, where is my list here? Okay. So over here, we have what you're going to hear in a second, which will be the my chain dry. So my dry chain. So it's the guitar into the Marshmallow, which has an internal loading system, as well as it basically is internally variac in a sense. The heaters, the B plus, the bias are all lowered down to what a variac would be, approximately 7980 volts. And then it has a line out on the back as well. So this sort of takes the place or accomplishes all the tasks of what goes on after the AB box, the main Marshall and the load with the line outs. All right. So, but for right now, we've got the Marshall, which is internally, the Marshmallow rather, which is internally, the line out is going to that super lead just below the teddy head right there. And it's modified. It's a 72, 73. It's a hand wire. It's not the circuit board one. Not that it really matters. But it's plugged into the power amp, which means it's going into the phase inverter. So I broke the signal right after the treble pot. So where the treble pot would feed the phase inverter, there's a break with a jack, a switching jack. And when I plug into that jack, I bypass the front of the amp and I go straight into the power amp. So that's what I'm using right there. So again, it's guitar, Marshmallow, line out into the super leads, line in. And then the super lead is going into this universal audio aux box that's down here on the floor, which is just set to the greenback punch setting, right? Greenback punch. And then that's going into my DAW. I've been keyed in a lot that I need to get a better, interface. That I need to get a Universal Audio Apollo and connect everything with the SPIDEF. And that the two units play so much better and there's so much more information when you hook it up that way versus the way I have with the line outs. But anyway, this is what we got. So let's give it a quick listen to, a quick hoodanny, and see what we got for sort of our dry signal. So let's let me check my levels to make sure that it's loud enough and that we can mute our microphone too, so you can hear that as well. Needs to come up just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to mute the microphone so we could just hear the amplifier. Okay, so that's the dry sound. So that's the sound that you're always going to be hearing whenever Ed's kind of playing. It's going to have that, really unaffected, pure, direct, quick transient kind of sound. All right, so now let's put the wet rig together and we'll see how that would work and how that would sound. And it'll sort of show you how, where the echo and the phase and all that stuff is important. So let me get up here and we're going to go back here. Okay, and I'm going to take the line out from the back of the amp and it's going to go to the GE10. And I'm going to feed this 6-band EQ with the line out from the back of the Marshall. So let's look at the wet chain on a diagram so you could sort of see exactly what's going on right now versus before. So now we have the guitar going into the Marshmallow, like I said, with the internal load, all that stuff. The line out is feeding the 6-band. The 6-band is going to the EC80. The EC80 is going into the Phase 90. The Phase 90 is going into this Boss EQ pedal for a little signal makeup. And then it's going into the line in of the super lead, which is then again feeding the aux again, set on greenback punch going into the DAW. So all we've basically done is inserted these effects after the Marshall head. So let's listen to what that sounds like. So let me turn on the EC80 and let's turn on the phaser. As you notice, it's still quiet. It didn't get noisier. which is a plus, right? If you put all this crap in front of this amp, you would just be hearing nothing but it's a nightmare. So to me, this makes way more sense. So that's the what if. What if it was done this way? It has some advantages. Not saying that this is the only possibility, but this is the road I'm going to go down right now and see where we're at. So let's go through it and see what we would end up with. So we got the Univox on and the phaser on, so we could just do the very end of Eruption and see how the phaser sort of complements the speed of the echo unit. So it'd be like, I've got the foot switch up here to turn this. I should have said that. Up here is the foot switch to turn on the EC80. So let's do it again. Now you can hear the phaser working on that. So I think that pretty much shows you how that was done. And I apologize for the EC80 right now because the tape is dead. That tape in the back is done. You can hear how muffled the repeat and low the repeat is. That tape has to be replaced. So I got to do the whole either take apart this cassette and put some new, 1/8" tape in there, or buy one of those. It was a weird recording format. Buy some pre-recorded music that would stick in the back of this thing as well. So anyway, the EC80 has to be improved, but you can hear how that's what's working on, right? There's no question that the phaser is after that. So how is the stuff being switched in and out, right? Because it explains quite well how he could switch things on and off. So what we had, right, is so we have at the end of Eruption, and this would have been, however, live. Let's say the live versions that we know about where he switches guitars, it would have gone from, like. And then he would have put the guitar away. It's not making any noise anymore. But Rudy would hit the AB box, and then Eddie would come back out and turn off the loop for the EC80, and he'd been to, and that's still the wet rig, not the dry rig. We have both going on right now, right? So did he probably turned off both the phaser and the EC80, or maybe he just turned off the wet rig? I'm not entirely sure. It's very possible. It's very possible. If you went into, right, if you turned off the phaser at the same time. But you see how intense that is? Not only is it more intense, but it also has more frequency to it. And that's basically because it's being fed by a better signal than a guitar signal is. It's being fed by a line level signal from a transformer. So that's a better signal for this to hear, and it's going to do more with it. It's going to work better. So that explains a lot of what we hear in Eruption. Also, when we put we're not going to do that right now, but when we put the flanger in this loop as well after the amplifier, I think you're going to find that the flanger sounds different as well, that it works better. So I think the next thing to do in this project, because we've got this now just sort of pieced together, is to build like a pedal board that is going to do what Eddie's did. And unfortunately, I'm not, unfortunately, but for practicality reasons, I don't think I'm going to use the Univox anymore because I just think it's too much of a pain in the butt. It does sound pretty cool, but the tape and all that stuff sounds like crap. After a while, it doesn't work. The tape wears out. It gets less strong all the time. The motors burn out. They're a pain in the ass. And the same thing with Echoplexes. And I only have one Echoplex. Need two. I'm not spending another $2,000 on Echoplexes. That's ridiculous. Not doing that. So what I propose to do is to use a couple of these Echoplex pedals as the Echoplexes, right? Because this is just for our wet rig. You know, the sonic quality is coming from the down the middle signal. So we're going to build the wet pedal board with two of these. And then in terms of a Univox clone, I might just use a third Echoplex pedal. So maybe we use 3 Echoplex pedals. Maybe. If someone knows like a better delay pedal that would work to simulate, an old tape delay or the echo that the Univox produces, let me know. I'll look into that. But I think I'm going to build it with 3 Echoplexes, the phaser, the flanger, the loop box, and the phase 90. And I think that's it. And then I'm going to have to build one more Marshall. I don't want to modify any of my older Plexis. I just don't want to really do that right now. That one, is workhorse. I don't mind that it was modded. So that's fine. So I'll build another 100-watt head to be used as the second power amp. And then we'll run it into 2 aux boxes and then into the DAW and see what we end up with. So this week, it's going to be back downstairs to work on the pedal board. All right, so I'm excited about this, to start moving into some of the, finer details of how he's getting all the different sounds. Because I'm really happy with the way the head sounds now and the loading and all that. I think that's good. Now we have to figure out exactly how it all works together with the rest of it. So that's where we're heading from here. All right, so now I think maybe we'll just go to answer some of these, or go look at some of the comments in the YouTubes. Let me turn that off. I'm going to turn off my Univox too. No point in wasting motor and tape life just sitting there. All right, so let's go to YouTube and let's listen to some comments. Let's see. So we need to go somewhere around 6 days ago. 6 days ago. Jordan. All right, here we go. The first one. This would be from Tenor Jordan. Good to hear from you. You're so right about that. You don't hear a lot that isn't supposed to be heard. Sorry, my glasses are a little bit, maybe they're not strong enough anymore. Finger slides, the string behind the headstock ringing, the springs in the back ringing. This is something I hear all the time in covers. He had incredible control of the quietness in between playing, and that had very little to do with rolling the volume up, which is something he didn't really do much. Okay. I mean, yeah, but, that's something that you have to learn. And I think a lot of that is from being highly critical of oneself and really listening to what you're doing. I'm a terrible guitar player, but because I like doing this more. So I don't have any control whatsoever. But I remember I have a friend, Brian Dennis, who, had his own band, toured around the world. He lives here in North Carolina in Raleigh. Great guy. Worked with Little Big Town, Gavin DeGraw. I was musical director, recorded lots of albums, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, we were having like Indian food one day with my partner, Greg, and we were having a blast or whatever. And I was just like asking him. I was like embarrassed to ask him too, because it's like, I'm such an idiot. Why am I even talking about this shit? It's like, anyway, so I asked him, I said, how do you control your sound so well? Like in terms of all that excess noise and, not picking too hard or too soft and muting and all that stuff. He was like, man, It's like the first time he had this band, Mr. Potato Head. So it's like when we went in to record our album and I listened to the playback, he said, "Oh my God, that has to stop now." He said it literally like that. He's like, "This has got to stop." So he said from that point on, he learned that he had to, more importantly than anything else in guitar playing, is to listen to yourself. And that means really listen to it. There's a lot of times when we play, right? I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, but this is so true. So let's say you're remembering a song in your mind, right? You can hear the whole song and you hear all the parts and it plays in your head. Sometimes it gets stuck in there and it drives you crazy. But when you're listening to a song that you know, you're hearing your mind's version of it along with what's coming into your ears. So a lot of times when you're playing guitar, you're listening to your mind playing the guitar and not what's coming out of the speakers. This is really weird, but it's true. So you hear what your brain thinks is going on as opposed to what is going on. And you need to shut that thing off and not listen to that internal sound or internal conversation and only listen to what's coming out of there. And then that is, like they say, the first step in anything is recognizing you have a problem. So if you can't hear it yourself, which I swear to God, I think most of the time it's you don't even know you're doing it. And then when you hear it come back on a tape, it's like when you listen to your voice for the first time on tape or listen to yourself play for the first time on tape, you're like, "Oh my God, this has to stop." So that's it. So yeah, so that's a cool topic. I appreciate that, Tanner. All right, so Scott G, he's got the next comment. Kurt Mitchell had said that the phase shifter was after the delay pedal. Hit the harmonic, turn your guitar volume off, and then you slowly turn the speed knob down on your delay. Absolutely. That's what we just did there. Works like a charm. Excellent, Scott. And thanks for that. Scott sent me a list of where which studios were used for what tracks. I need to see the records from Sunset Sound, because I'm wondering, like, they used 2 different studios for the album. Were there vocals? Were they recording vocals in the next studio? Were they mixing in the next studio? It's just mind blowing to think that they were tracking the band in 2 different studios and coming up with a consistent sound. I mean, but I wouldn't put past anything past guys that were as good as Templeman and Landy. So yeah. If you know anything about that, Scott, hit me up on that. All right, so we got Che Guitarra. Hey, Che. Oh, so yeah, I think I asked him, what's a UD50? Like, I should have known, but I'm like, what's UD50? It just didn't ring a bell. So Univox Unidrive. Okay. Yeah, so Che was trying to post some clips he put up, or he had on somewhere regarding using a Unidrive in front of a Marshall for Van Halen-esque kind of stuff. And YouTube, for some reason, won't let him post the link. So I guess that they're just out of there. They don't want people, being directed off site. That doesn't make sense. But Che, if you want to send it to me, Ossie at 3monkeysamps.com, I'll put it up. All right. So next comment. Jimmy DeVere. What's up, Jimmy? Parts do sound overdubbed. At least I think maybe I hear. This is in response to Eruption. That clip. Parts do sound overdubbed. At least I think maybe I hear one phrase trailing over the next. But then again, how would that be possible with a room mic and close mics unless they were both overdubbed simultaneously? Very true. So it couldn't have been. And maybe the tails are just Mike's bass. I don't know. I'm kind of confused to what these tracks are supposed to represent. Are they just single mono track from the board? I think so. But then again, we don't know, right? We've gotten isolated tracks before, and they were like, these are the raw tracks, and they were polished already. So they were not the scratch raw track. They weren't. These may not be either. We don't know where they came from and at what point in the signal chain they were taken from and how much processing was done on it and what the exact source was, right? So you're correct to say, are they just a single mono from the board, or is it a mix down of two tracks when you start discussing the echo chamber, regarding the echo. All right, so what's the source for the echo chamber, right? I theorized what if the source for the speakers in the echo chamber was the room sound. I think that would create a more natural sound and would encompass the entire band equally, which would make things sound even better. So that's a what if there. So regarding the echo, all right, that was interesting. So the computer decided to go into an infinite loop. I think it knew we were playing with delays, so it started to go and repeat a small section of what I was saying over and over again. So I had to restart the system and continue on. So where we left off was, let me get to it again. God. It was Jimmy DeVere's comment. So we were talking about, all right, so the last thing we were talking about, or last thing mentioned, was the room sound coming from, or rather the echo chamber being fed by the room sound. Okay, so regarding the economic experience, using universal audio plugins like plate reverb, you have settings for pre-delay. Yes. So if an engineer was used to having pre-delay on a plate reverb, but didn't have access to choose to use that for some reason, then it would make sense to get that pre-delay by placing room mics closer or farther from the source as needed to get that pre-delay prior to being fed to the echo chamber. Having said that, all right, I won't go into the next station, but yeah. So what is pre-delay? So what he's talking about is there's a time difference between when the signal is hit and then when that reverb starts. And you can delay it a little bit. So it'll be like, boom, and that time difference is considered pre-delay. So what is pre-delay? Well, pre-delay, I think, was not artificially manufactured. It was something that was present in studios as a chorus of either signal chains or of mic placements of the size and shape of echo chambers like you had at CBS, where they had like underground chambers and all kinds of crazy stuff. So if, you didn't have pre-delay, it's sort of, to me, that makes it, it's kind of backwards. It's like pre-delay is natural in a studio. And if you were trying to simulate a studio, you might use on a plug-in a pre-delay to simulate, having a bigger room where it would fire off a wall and then come back and there'd be some delay in there. So I think the pre-delay is just built into the equation. But I agree with what you're saying there for sure, Jimmy. So let's go on to the next part of what he's talking about here. Having said that, I'm not sure that it is giving the slight chorus effect we seem to hear on those parts. At least I don't think I hear it so much on your demo. But I do like your demo for reverb, which sounds fuller and has more depth and wider image. Well, thanks for the compliment there on the reverb. And that's just, just throwing it up and not even taking more than a second. I mean, I like to sort of, with anything, it's, like if you're painting something or you're writing a story, you throw up some basic stuff to kind of be placeholders, and then you move in and start adding the details to it, right? So it's sort of like make the skeleton, and when the skeleton is done, you start hanging the meat, and then when that's done, you start putting the skin on it, So there's many stages to creating something. So regarding the chorusing effect, I just think that, if you have delayed sounds, that creates chorusing. So if you were bouncing something, I think that was what Plexidust was saying, was that there was a mic that was taking a sound off. So like here would be Ed's amplifier, and behind that would be glass, and the microphone was pointed this way. So the amplifier the sound would come out, bounce off the wall, hit the glass, and then be captured. Or no, it was the other way. So it would come off the glass wall and come back to the mic that was pointed this way. So it created like a 2 or 3 millisecond delay, which when combined would create a chorusing effect. And I wasn't able to capture that. I think we can do that pretty easily, but I wasn't going for that in that particular trial. All right, so let's move on. So we got Plexidust. Stay Plexidust. Such a mind-blowing analysis. Wow, that's way too kind. And you still did not get to the combined track. I know I got to put this stuff. I'm drinking from a fire hose, Plexi. My mind is just full of stuff, and we'll get to it. We'll get to it. And I do appreciate everything that you're sending me, and I'm reading through it and going through it. But it's like there's so much input right now. I need to absorb it all because it can be a little bit overloading for me. It's like sometimes there'll just be one statement someone makes and it'll take me like a long time to really absorb that. Because my mind will start working on different things and everything else kind of gets put in the back and I miss a lot of stuff. So I apologize if I'm missing anybody's stuff that they're sending to email or elsewhere. I'll get to it, and it's not out of, I'm not trying to ignore anybody, that's for sure. It's difficult to kind of absorb all of it for me. I'm not good at that. So yeah, Lexi, thanks for those clips and thanks for the last emails. We'll be in touch. All right, so we got Arlen Stephenson, 5205. Thanks for all your insights on this newly released material. I tried stacking the Sunset Sound Studio 1 live room into the plate river, and it made a world of difference. Before it sounded good, but not quite there. I get close to Van Halen 2, but still looking for the sizzle in Van Halen 1. And I'm going to try mixing the mics with some of the line in and see... Got to expand the comment and see what that does. I never heard of that possibility until one of your last episodes. Keep going down the rabbit hole. Many of us has this disease and we're searching for a cure. Yeah, I got it bad. It's like, I was talking to someone else before. They're like, it's since the passing of Eddie, there's been a resurgence of exploration into his sounds and his playing and all that stuff. And it was like, is that part of it? And I'm like, no. Always been here. Probably never leaving. Been here way too long. Definitely not healthy. But like I said, this is something you can use where the mind processes you use are applicable in a lot of areas. And it's like the JFK assassination. A lot of people spend time on that. I do too. All right. So thanks for that, Carlin. Thanks for that comment, Arlen. Tone Master General. Maybe the phaser had a weak 9-volt in it. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, it could be. Absolutely. I wouldn't put that behind them, that could be. I'm going off of right now I'm going off the maybe, that we're dealing with a wet dry rig and the phaser was only on the wet. All right. Chandler Clement, 1365. Hey, Chandler. I love your theory about the room mic feeding the chamber. I've played around with the Sunset Reverb plugin as well, and I just can never get it to sound the same as what I hear on the record. I think that missing body from the reverb, from the room reverb, gives the chamber could be missing link for me. I think so. You may already have seen this, but when I look at the dB output meters on my interface while listening to Eruption, I notice the right side is always slightly louder than the left, even though the guitar seems panned straight down the middle for that track. Is it possible Don panned the room mic over to the right to make the whole thing sound a little more three-dimensional? I mean, this is getting back to what Jimmy was talking about. It's like we don't know what the source of that track is and how much information is on it. It could be two mics. And also the room mic. Is that one mic or is that two mics? I would think that, you might want to put up more than one room mic if you're trying to create a stereo spread. So like you're saying right there, if you hear it pan to one side or another, if I put one room mic up on one side of the room and one mic on the other side of the room and Eddie's on one side, yes, you're going to get that sort of movement in the field, in the stereo field, right in the sound stage. It'll be a little bit to one side versus the other, and that'll create more illusion of space and of where they are in that image. So it very well could be that the room mic is two mics. It may be more than one. So I like that comment, Chandler. All right, next you were talking about, you may have already seen this, but look at we just did that. All right, so great comment there, Chandler. That's very true. Until we hear it from the, and even then, who knows? Until we hear it from Don, I don't know. All right, so Bob and Blackie, fan club sucks. Okay, I won't go to that fan club then. Oh, this is for an older video where I was slaving amps with the load box. And he says, you missed a photo of him playing the white Destroyer with a Sun Model T head in the background. I just went back and checked the photo. There's also an orange head under the Sun Model T. Yeah, Eddie used a lot of amps, right? And so that, to me, is like, it gives credence to this wet, dry idea that the affected sounds with all this stuff on it were different amplifiers. And there's permutations, right? That maybe there was, the Echoplexes were on, maybe there's 3 amps, maybe there's 2. These are all permutation possibilities. But having something like a Sun and having, Music Mans and having all those different kinds of, amplifiers that do sound different in terms of their preamps, they would be useful as power amps. In fact, you know what? I don't need to build a Marshall. I don't think so. I've got a Soldano clone back behind all of those, a slow clone back behind all those. And if my mind is not playing tricks on me, I think they have line-ins on them. So you may see a surf green Soldano clone going up onto the pile. We're going to do that. I think we're going to do that. All right. Thanks for that comment. All right, so now we've got Warrior of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, depending upon where part of the world you're from. At 417. All right, so we're going for the Eruption, where I was thinking about, am I hearing some kind of an overdub or some weird stuff? At 417, it's not an overdub. He turns the phaser on to play the chords, but does not mute the A and D strings, which still ring out. Then he moves up the neck to do the bends at 419. When he turns the phaser off in that section, you hear him jump in. You hear the jump in treble, which sounds like a boost, but it's just to remove the phaser effect on the amp tone. Well, that's what I hear. That sounds like a pretty good theory to me. I'm going to listen to that exact thing. Is that, having many ears and many experiences is a good thing. If you've heard something like that happen before, you might say that's very similar to what I've heard in another situation, and I know it was this, so therefore this is likely to be that. So Warrior, I'm attending to agree with you because I think that was done all in one take. Who was it who was talking about having the difficulty of the room mics tracking with the regular mics if you were doing overdubs. So yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I think it's got to be definitely one take, and what I thought was a punch in is exactly what you're talking about, bringing in that phaser possibly. All right, so Tim O'Keefe, what's up, Tim? And what little experience I have in making really good sounding tracks. I do think that the volume knob is a considerable part of the drive gain, as well as the pick thickness and an attack. The refinement involved in these recordings, his playing in general, is pretty exceptional. You definitely have my vote for Sundays and Wednesdays. Okay, yeah, so to do like a Wednesday, sort of like Wednesday is Sunday at Carvel. We'll have like Willie the Whale. If you don't know, if you're not from the Northeast, maybe you'd never heard Tom Carvel, hawking ice cream cakes on the Channel 11. Where Wednesday is always Sunday. Buy one, get one free. All right, so yeah, pick thicknesses, right? We're talking about the different types of picks and things like that. I was talking with Tim, and one of the things that I heard in interviews between, I guess it was it, I don't think it was Rosen. It was someone else, and they were interviewing Ed. It may have been Rosen, and it was asking him, are you still using those really thin picks? And I think he said yes or no. I don't remember. It was irrelevant, but Sammy Hagar was with him. And he was saying that how he doesn't even know how you played. And maybe it was Jazz Obrecht, I think maybe was the one who was doing the interview. It was like, I don't know how you play with one of those things. So at one point I did buy, a long time ago, these Dunlop picks that are 0.38 millimeters. And I just was buying every pick that I could find in Guitar Center because I wanted to experiment with all of them and see what they sound like. And these really thin picks are interesting because the pick noise is actually quite loud in comparison to like a heavier like this Herco, right? If you use the thinner pick, you hear the pick a lot. Right? And it gives the illusion that you're picking really hard. And a lot of pick. The other thing that's interesting, let me move the camera down a little bit. Sorry for anybody that might have vertigo. The other interesting thing is these things give so easy. It really, I mean, you can like almost have the whole pick stuffed in there. Right? I mean, there's guys that talk about like escape angles when you're playing speed picking, and that you need to have an angle at which your pick can escape from the strings and not get stuck, right? Or be using the edge of the pick where it's more likely to slip. But with these things, I mean, I'm almost got the whole pick buried in there and I could still do it. But if I go to a Herco, right, and I bury it, now it's stuck. And you really have to be perfectly precise, that just the tip, or you have to angle it a little bit so you're using kind of the edge of the pick and it's sliding over it, slipping over it. So an interesting thing that is related to the pick would be something that my friend Jim Service told me once. So Jim, if anybody doesn't know Jim's been a tech forever, right? A guitar tech forever. A long list of people he worked for. I met him through Aerosmith, and at the time he was working for Joe Perry, and he was Joe Perry's guitar tech. He's worked for Slash, and he worked for Van Halen back in the day. Not when David Lee Roth was around, but when Sammy was around, he did tours with them. And he was with them on their last tour as well, teching for Wolfie. He's also worked with David Lee, all kinds of stuff like that. And what Jim told me, because Jim loves Van Halen a lot, and he knows I'm like a Van Halen idiot, and he humors me. So he told me that how Eddie plays is that a lot of people think he's smashing the strings. And he may put a lot of, and a lot of that stuff in it, but he said he's basically a virtuoso in terms of his picking, that he's very light, that he doesn't smash the strings, he just kind of caresses them, and that's part of how he gets his sound. And it's like in the interviews you hear him playing and he really sounds like he's smashing the strings. So maybe it has to do with the pick. You hear it, like, you hear that pick just cranking, but I'm barely touching it. So 0.38 pick or light or something like that might be worth checking out as well. And also the other interesting thing with like picks is like when the amp is going, that initial strike with the pick creates a kind of a nasally sound, which you don't hear on Eddie's sound. So it's very possible that that pick was lighter than we think, used on some of those albums. And later he would go on to things like, metal picks and things like that. And metal picks, they have a kind of unique sound too. So the whole point of the material of the pick, in my opinion, is the contact noise, right? So contact noise, not anything more than that, because that's the first impulse your brain hears and influences the sound thereafter. So again, light pick, Herco, metal. Very different sounds. So experiment with picks as well. So I think that's long enough for today. A lot of talking and gum flapping and all that stuff. But I'm really excited about setting up, going further again. It was sort of like after the amp was where I was happy with. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. And then I was like, well, there's a whole nother can of worms to open up. And, sometimes it'll even get you to kind of backtrack a little bit too and maybe change something here or there. But right now, this is where it's at. So I'm going to start building the pedal board and experimenting with all that. And of course, using 3 Monkeys cables. So thanks for watching. And hopefully we'll see you sooner than later. And we'll be downstairs making a pedal board. So I'll see you next time.